When I told my mom I was going to write a book called How Music Can Make You Better, she said, better at what? She's a musician. So I said yes, because so often we think of music as a sledgehammer. Music will just make you better. Music, activates the whole brain. Music this, music that. But it's not a sledgehammer. It's a Swiss Army knife with specific tools for specific purposes. And what might work for one person won't for another. And let me explain to you a little bit why that is. What is music? If we, as scientists, want to study music, we need to define it. And when I ask my students at the Conservatory of Music in San Francisco, where I do a bit of teaching, to define music, we argue for hours. And then eventually we come up to some version of, well, it's organized sound with the intent to express an idea or emotion. Really? Is that really what music is? I can turn speech into song just by repeating it. I can turn speech into song just by repeating it. I can turn speech into song just by repeating it. And now you can predict it. So what is that? What have I done? I've simply taken a phrase and repeated it and given you a pattern. And all of a sudden, something amazing has happened in your brain. You have turned that pattern into all of these other layers of meaning. It has rhythm. It has melody. You can predict what's happening next. And then if I do something different, that's even more exciting. But essentially, if you think about how that works biologically, it's kind of amazing. Because after all, it's just some kind of biological change in your brain. But if I did it long enough, anytime you heard that phase, anytime those same air pressure changes reached your ears, you would still hear it differently. You would still extract a different meaning from it. So music isn't anywhere except in your brain. And your brain is different from everybody else's brain, and that's why it's individual. In fact, even silence, as this famous piece by John Cage shows, can be music. This is in 2 movements. It's 4 minutes and 33 seconds, and the instructions are that the musicians should not play their instruments. Okay? In the concert hall, that becomes music. It becomes a profound experience because we extract all kinds of meaning out of it that wasn't there in its superficial qualities. We humans are primed to see meaningful, personally relevant stimuli, even if they have not that intention, right? Especially if they somehow might predict probably the biggest threat to each other, which is another human being's behavior. That's when our brains get really excited. And so music is a way for us to understand each other. And after my PhD, I actually took a bunch of time off from academia, and I immersed myself as a professional singer and in the gig lifestyle. And what I learned when I came back to academia was that we as scientists can learn more from studying what music does to us than musicians can learn from what scientists can reduce music to. So I like to see music as a great example of human behavior that can tell us something profound about what it means to be human. And of course, as I mentioned already, the first step is to understand its individual effects. And that's one of the reasons why I've partnered with this startup company called Roboto that takes biometrical information from your wearable, heart rate variability, which is a measure of how stressed you are and other things. And it combines it with information from streaming services like Spotify, for example, and it uses its algorithm to figure out what are the features of music that an individual responds to. And then it can suggest a playlist for a specific purpose. And the reason that I'm telling you all of this, because when it comes to understanding how music can be used in the clinical setting, we need to understand how it affects that individual person under those individual circumstances. But getting back to how music can make you better, my mom's first thing was, well, listening to Mozart makes you smarter, right? She's a musician. So let me just say in 2 slides, no. I wrote a white paper about how, in fact, musical training can have all kinds of effects on brain development. But the biggest take-home that I came up with at the end of the research that I did for writing this white paper is that the biggest effect that music interventions in schools can do is improve school attendance. When there's a music program in school, kids come, especially if it's a good one. That's another thing we need to talk about. But if it's a good music program, students will show up. And then this becomes an economic argument, because if you keep one kid in school and out of prison in California, that pays for 10 years of a music teacher's salary. But that's not what I'm here to talk about. If you want information about that, however, I'm happy to hand you the white paper. Instead, I want to tell you about how music can be used in the clinical setting. So, in 1980, music in clinical settings was considered entertainment. In fact, this woman here on Oliver's right is Connie Tomaino. And she was a music therapist that came in 1980 to Beth Abraham, which is the hospital where Oliver Sacks, in the middle, did his work. He had just published Awakenings, the book about awakening patients that turned into a movie. There we have a photobomber on the other side. And so when Connie came to Beth Abraham, she first took the job because she was told it was going to be in the Department of Medicine. And she was really excited about that, because that suggested that it could actually be used as a part of the clinical care of the patients. But when she got there, it ended up being in the Department of Recreation. And that was really upsetting. And in that time, there were very few clinicians and almost no neurologists that she knew that actually took her work seriously. But she had already seen in her previous work that music can be used to diagnose, because different kinds of neurological insults have different effects on how a person responds to music. But it can also be used to treat and to connect that person with others. So she got to Beth Abraham, and she got a note from somebody named Ollie that said, "Every disease is a musical problem. The cure, a musical solution." This was a quote from a German poet. And this changed Connie's life, but it also changed Oliver's life, because finally he had a partner with whom he could explore his love of music. Ultimately ended up in a book that some of you might have read called Musicophilia. So one of the ways in which music can be used as potentially a solution is very much specific with respect to how music affects the brain. And you've heard already about dopamine, and you probably know dopamine is a reward chemical, but it's much more than that. In fact, one of the things that it is really important for is voluntary movement. And so patients with Parkinson's disease, they lose a part of their brain in which the cells make dopamine. And even though it seems like there might be some more of the reward system dopamine intact in these patients, their ability to move voluntarily is often one of the first presenting symptoms. More so than the tremor, more so than the things that we associate with Parkinson's disease. It's the inability to get up out of a chair, or to reach for a box of cereal, or to just get moving. So, can music help? Because music, in fact, not only increases baseline dopamine levels, but it also directly affects all of these motor regions that are involved in voluntary movement. You don't see the rhythm, you feel the beat. And in fact, that whole circuitry of voluntary movement is involved in just how we process music, even if we are listening passively. So I'm going to show you a video that was taken by a physical therapist named Anasia Gunlock. And she died tragically in a car accident, actually, about a year after this video was taken. And this is Larry Jennings. You can see that he has trouble walking. So he's got this Parkinsonian shuffle. He sometimes freezes. And this is about 10 years after his diagnosis, so pretty far into the illness. And Anasia read a paper that music might help gait, consistency in particular, in people with Parkinson's disease, especially if they can entrain to the beat. So she wanted to try that with Larry. So you'll see, at first, she plays the music, and he has to stand for a minute and listen to it to catch the beat. You can see that his gait is much smoother, more consistent. But here's my favorite part. Look at his face. Walking is hard for Larry. But in this moment, It's almost fun.
I guess we're all gonna be.
Music has made Larry better. I'm going to give you one more example, because I can't let all the other scientists get away with showing all the brain slides. I mean, I have to give a brain slide, right? Okay. So one of the other very powerful interventions that music therapists have developed in the course of neurologic music therapy is to treat patients with something called brocas aphasia. So brocas area is a part of the brain in the left frontal lobe that is responsible for producing speech, getting the words out. And there's this analogous area called, or there's another area, sorry, I should say, called Wernicke's area there in orange, which is involved in speech comprehension. So in order to have a conversation, you need to understand what someone is saying, think of a response, and then initiate the response. Patients with Broca's area damaged, whether it's from stroke or in the case of Gabby Giffords, which I'll show in a moment, from a gunshot wound, can't get the words out. And it can be very frustrating. Because they know what they want to say, they just can't get the words out. But it's not a problem with their musculature, because they can still sing the words. So music therapists recognized this and figured out a way of developing an intervention that capitalizes on the fact that in the right hemisphere, this whole area is intact. In fact, there's a fiber tract called the arcuate fasciculus. On the left, it's like a 6-lane highway for most of us who have left lateralized language function, which actually is most of us, even if you're left-handed. On the right, it's like a country road. It's a single lane. It's much smaller. But in musicians, with musical training, it thickens. It becomes a 2 or 3-lane highway on the right side. Because think about what musicians have to do. They have to take their emotions and other sort of holistic sounds and turn it into a way of expressing themselves, which is an analogous thing that the right hemisphere does. Well, with melodic intonation therapy, music therapists, over time, teach people to learn to sing phrases that are important to them. I love you. I love my mother. Be sure to tell her that. And so you learn over time that you can sing the phrases that you want to say, and then you can use that strategically. But here's the money brain shot. Before treatment, here up on the top, you've got this thin arcuate fasciculus on the right side in patients with this injury. After music therapy, it's just music therapy, you've got this thicker arcuate fasciculus. It literally rewires the brain and allows that person to have the kind of function that they wouldn't have had otherwise. And to demonstrate this, I want to show you a video of Gabby Giffords preparing a speech in which she uses the techniques that she developed through this intensive music therapy.
One thing that helps Giffords, her love of singing and music. Last August, she gave a rousing speech titled Summoning Hope at the Democratic National Convention. Just 90 seconds long, Hirsch Cruz says it took months of preparation, and she sketched in musical and other notation on the script to help Giffords with the delivery.
We are at a crossroads.
One line in particular gave Giffords trouble.
I put one foot in front of the other, which was a really difficult line to master. And I just remembered hearing that in a song when I was younger, and so I found lyrics and music, and we just incorporated that into our sessions, and she used the music to help her get to the words.
I put one foot in front of the other. I found one word, and then I found another.
So I just want to end. It's amazing. It's amazing the work they do, music therapists. But I want to end with some work that was funded by One Mind, that I was a very, very small part of during a think tank, but that really was really the work of Tasha Golden and Susan Magsamen at the NeuroArts Blueprint, where they took a scoping review of all of the literature, all of the different ways that this Swiss Army knife is used as a tool to help people with serious mental illnesses. And what I just want to say is that we're going away from the sledgehammer approach. We now have the precision tools to measure the effectiveness, but we also recognize that music is not just one thing. It's not the same for every individual, but it can really be used powerfully, strategically, to make people better. So look at this explosion of research. The diameter of these circles, and this is, I just selected what I think of as the most rigorous scientific studies of this period, which I either pre-post test with a really good active control or randomized controlled trials. And since 2015, there's been an explosion of research into this topic. And that's partly because of Francis Collins and the NIH supporting this research. And that gets me to bringing us all back to, from Francis Collins to the beginning, to the fruits of that labor, which is the Sound Health Network that I'm on the leadership team of, which is now designed to promote the research and public awareness of the impact of music into health and well-being. And I want to leave us on a note that is very positive, which is the future is only going to get brighter because some of the greatest minds in science are trying to figure out how most effectively we can use this thing that we all love. In fact, many of us are obsessed with music to make us better. One last thing, oxytocin also those levels are elevated with music, particularly if you synchronize with another person. So I encourage you to get up on the dance floor when we're in the middle of a great concert, and if you don't have a lot of rhythm, you might talk to Dev because intranasal sprays of oxytocin can improve your syncopation. Thanks.